here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week, it's going to be the turn of Marina Muhlfriedel, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all the other groovy stuff. Has been in various bands, including Backstage Pass and also Vivabeat, and has done lots of other creative bits and pieces throughout her life. So you'll be able to find out more about that in this fascinating interview. So take notes. I will test you at the end. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Marina, it's over to you.
Absolutely. I was fortunate enough to be the youngest of 4 kids in my family. So although I was born like mid-50s-ish, I was hearing the music of siblings, respectively 5, 6, and 9 years older. Now, one of my sisters ran away to Haight-Ashbury in the late 60s. And this exploded my world. Before she left, she was hanging out with Love and the Seeds and the whole LA Sunset Strip scene. And as she went to San Francisco, she made sure her sister, me, was still hip to all the bands. So I was hearing, particularly Jefferson Airplane, who I love, and Quicksilver Messenger Service, lots of those bands. I was still really young, but I loved being in the know. And I started playing some guitar. I would try and play those things. So that was a serious awakening for me. And that kind of lent itself to a lot of musical discovery on my own. And when I moved to England just after my first year of college, I felt like I was so familiar with England because of my familiarity with all the English bands. Of course, the Beatles had broken my world open when I was like 9 or 10, I guess.
Yes. Amazing. So did you say you were born mid-50s? Did you say 55? And did you say you were one of 4 children?
Yes.
So where did you come in that sort of sequence of children?
I was the youngest
Oh,
by far.
How far were you the youngest?
By far, my closest sibling was 5 years older. And my brother was 9 years older.
Right. That's quite interesting because I'm one of 3 boys, but I'm the youngest by 5 years. So they had, these 2, and then there was a bit of a gap, and then I came along. I think they were trying for a girl, and then they thought, no, there's 3 boys, we're going to give up now. So, so it was quite interesting. So they probably, did you have a little bit more, were they a bit more relaxed about your childhood after having to go the first 3 and think, oh, what the hell, we're doing okay. We haven't killed any of them yet.
Absolutely. I feel like they just figured I would learn from the others and I would get on in life. And they just kind of let me do my thing unless there was like a serious problem. And I feel like I just got away with all kinds of adventures that my older siblings would have never had a shot at.
Yes, because I think around that time-ish, there was a famous book that people were getting, who were having babies. Is it Dr. Spock's baby book, where they had to, they sort of were very rigid about feeding children and how to bring up babies. And it was absolutely horrendous. I mean, God knows, So my poor old brother's got that kind of treatment, whereas I just was like, oh, well, he'll just feed him when he wants and when he does, just to get on with it, be a mother rather than looking at Dr. Spock's, not obviously the Star Trek one, but the other person, whoever he is. Yes.
I think also for my parents and your parents, by the time you raised, in your case, 2 other kids, and in my family, 3 other ones, they were exhausted. They wanted to have fun. They wanted to go on vacation, have cocktail parties, do what they do. right? And so you have these like the little ones around the house. It's like you get one of the older ones to stay home and keep an eye on them. But I feel like that fostered so much opportunity, at least for me, because I didn't feel terribly structured. So I felt like I could kind of act on impulse. And I had a lot of creative juice started germinating, and it really helped me that my
Yes.
parents weren't really boxing me in.
I know, it's interesting. Do you occasionally have sort of like find when you meet somebody who was an only child, they're quite tricky because they've always had their own way. Whereas when you're the youngest of a few, two or three, you just realize, well, yeah, you don't always get your own way, and you just have to suck up and deal with it. But an only child is quite hard, in later life when you meet someone. You think, God, they're so touchy when you disagree with them. You think, oh yeah, no one ever. No one ever just punched them if they were irritating, or and if they do things. I know that doesn't sound great, but they would sort of like, if you do anything, I'll hurt you and you'll cry, and then you won't be able to play with us and things like that. And you think, oh, I won't cry because I want to go and play with my older brothers, because they always do. Their friends and that group always, when you're young, they seem so exciting, because my older brother was 7 years old and then the other one was 5, and so all they're seeing. But you couldn't cry, you couldn't tell tales on any of them, because they would just sort of ban you from any future games. So you sort of had to learn these things quite quickly, and and get told to shut up if you were being annoying. So there you go. That's
I
life,
think
isn't it?
that's a great life skill, actually, flying under the radar, right?
Yes, this is true. Well, that was interesting, because then my brother, who was in the 70s, that was his decade. He was into prog rock, and obviously said, "Don't play any of my records." But then I learned how to go into his room, play the records, and put them back without him knowing I'd been in there. So I had to be quite crafty. Otherwise, I'd have been, banned completely, and I didn't want that. So again, you had to be quite careful or sneaky. I don't know, probably the latter, really. But it did also mean that you were a bit more clued up with things if you wanted to get away with stuff. So it was quite useful. Did any of your older brothers or sisters, did you say they were also musically driven as well, or one or two of them?
Well, my sister, the one who ultimately ran away to hate Ashbury for the Summer of Love, she always played piano. And my brother, who was the eldest, played clarinet. And my other sister was a dancer.
Wow, that's amazing. So, God, so your sister really did run away to join the circus in '67. So that was did she go to Golden Gate Park and enter was that the Gathering of the Tribes? That was like, I think that was January '67, where they had Ginsberg and Timothy Leary doing his bit, and the Grateful Dead and Country Joe and the Fish. So was she just absolutely, was it free love, free for everything? Did she buy the whole trip?
She did. She went up there in 1966, and I happened to be home when she came by to drop off the letter for Mom and Dad, right? And I'm left with the "My world isn't your world anymore" letter, and really broke my parents' heart. And I think it was a year later, the song "She's Leaving Home" bye bye came out, and I just heard that play in my head forever. But there was something so incredible about the notion that you can run away, that you can decide to change your life. I felt so bad for my parents, but a light really went on for me
Yes,
about
absolutely.
the sort of dominion we have over our own existence.
Yes, and also I think parents, though, it is a bit hard. I mean, they were also keen for you to leave home. It's not like parents now where the kids are staying there forever. It's a bit like, you can. Oh yes, that was the thing. You can do that when you get your own home. So they weren't really strict, but there was a sense of like, no, when you're living with our house, my house, whatever, my parents, it was like you can do that when you leave home. So you always were like, God, I really want to leave home. There was no, I want to stay at home. It was like, oh my God, I can leave home. I can have my meals when I want to. I can have a mattress on the floor. I can be rebellious for that period of time. I mean, it was all probably quite mild, really. But when you're quite young, it felt really exciting, actually, and quite a relief, thinking, great, I'm not going to get told off by Dad.
Yeah, and I think at that time we had so many role models of independence, and we heard so many songs that talked about a life that wasn't most young people's lives. It was out in the world, it was sex and drugs and adventure and heart and love and breakups. And we all, at least for me, you kind of wanted to go jump in that pool and see what it's like to be out in the world.
So 66, 67, things are going well on the kind of the West Coast. But then there's the Charles Manson gang, isn't there? And obviously, the drugs get a bit harder, people get a bit messed up. There's a bit more psychotic behavior going on. How did you and your sister navigate that one? I mean, that's kind of, you're suddenly in those worlds of kind of having to become a bit better at judging people, but when you're young, you're a little bit naive. When you get older, you're a bit better. So, yes, how did you navigate those kind of scenes? Did you brush against them at all?
Well, one of my dear friends, remember, she was hitchhiking and got picked up by some of the people in the Charles Manson gang, and they took her back to the compound in Topanga and tried to convince her to stay on and be one of them, and she declined, fortunately. For the rest of us, it was very scary, but it was actually over a rather short period of time. I think some of the later dramas like that, like when you think of like the Hillside Strangler and such, they were more terrifying because they dragged on and on and on.
Yes.
I mean, it was scary, and I didn't know that much about Charles Manson at the time. I didn't realize the bands he had been auditioning for, that he'd been hanging out at the Whiskey. I was just a little younger than most of that, but it was very scary. But
yes.
unlike Norwich, Hollywood always had an underbelly. There was always a bit of a darkness, even back then. There were flashers and guys who would follow you, and just like things that weren't right. It was never safe completely. So you learn to kind of toughen up, to trust your street sense.
Yes, quite. Yes, it's a good life skill. So then when you got to 16, did you, at that stage, we in this country do A levels and then potentially go to university. So what about this is the early 70s for you. Did you then go to college and then within that come to England then for a period of time?
Well, I'll share this story with you. I graduated high school in 1971. And like many of my friends, I applied to a few colleges in California. At the time, most people didn't go any further, and I went up to Northern California to Sonoma State University because I had a lot of friends moving up there, and my sister lived in Northern California. And I thought I was kind of a hippie, but when I got up there and it was like rednecks and hippies and they were almost the same, and it was just, I thought I was going to go out of my mind being there. I was hitchhiking to San Francisco, which was about an hour away, every weekend to see shows. There were lots of Vietnam anti-war protests going on, so I would go there for that. I really didn't feel like I was having the satisfactory college experience I would have hoped for. And one night, a dear friend and I happened to be high on LSD. And the two of us were talking about how we had to get away from Sonoma. We wanted to be in a bigger world. We felt really claustrophobic, and we talked about stealing our roommate's car and driving to Connecticut. We realized we had no gas money. And we decided then that forget the East Coast. We're going to leave America and we're going to go international. And lo and behold, the very next day, I saw a poster on the wall of school for an agency that brokered applications to foreign universities and colleges. So at the time, we had payphones everywhere, and I called them, and they sent us applications, and I was accepted to Richmond, which was at the time part of University of London. Now it's the Richmond University in London. And I was also accepted into the School of University in Brighton and a couple of others. But Richmond was right down the block from London, and there was no way I was going to miss that.
No, my God. So that was 71, 72 that you went to Richmond.
Yeah.
Wow, that must have been amazing. How did the grant system work then at that stage? Did they have a fund for you, or did you have to pay for that?
Well, it was kind of amazing. At first, my parents were really reticent to let me go. And when I showed them what the costs were, they were kind of amazed. School was practically free. I committed to working 4 hours a week while I was there, and pretty much the only other thing I needed was a plane ticket. And
Wow.
so I worked 4 hours at the school, and then I got 2 side jobs in London. I worked for Jaeger Clothes. I was a tea girl there. It was a very posh sweater shop in Richmond. And every time someone would walk in, they would tell me, "Fix Mom a cup of tea," and I would do that. And then I worked at the Rainbow Theater.
Wow.
Selling records after the show.
That's very handy, actually, isn't it? So this was like the height of glam rock was appearing, and I guess David Bowie was on the scene at that stage, and then we also had, Donny, the Osmonds. God, that you couldn't move for the Osmonds, and basically Rollers, and then the beginning, I suppose, of pub rock and heavy rock at that stage. So were you at that stage hungry for sort of culture and music and art?
Starving. I inhaled everything I could. I went to shows constantly. I made friends with another American girl who was at Richmond, and we were kind of partners in crime.
Fantastic.
And we would go to shows at least a few times a week, and I was very interested in the art scene. So I would go to all the Cork Street openings and go to see the Pre-Raphaelite room at the museum. And, really London was an incredible wonderland of culture. You can find anything. And a woman named Joanna Spock-Dean, who I ended up being in Backstage Pass with before I left, she kind of gave me a little hint on how to get on the guest list for a lot of shows. And what she gave me some of the tour managers' names, and some of them she had phone numbers. And so I would call, Martha Hoople's tour manager and say, "Hi, at the time I was using my given first name, Joanne. Hi, my name's Joanne. I'm visiting from LA, and I understand you would be willing to put me on the guest list for the show tonight." It was so naive and brazen, but it worked. And So Marilyn and I, we paid for some shows, and then we saw free shows at the Rainbow because we were working there. But
Yes.
but we got on the guest list to a lot of them.
Well,
It was
that's
great.
fantastic. Yes, I think Abby Hoffman once wrote a book called, I don't know, Steal It, and he mentioned about sort of how to blag your way into various things. But getting on the guest list or getting a review copy for records was one of those great moments when you think, my God, there's somebody at the end of a phone whose job it is to give you free stuff. I can't believe this. A +1. God. So what were your main bands that you started seeing? Because you were still very young at that stage, 17, 18. So what was your sort of main bands that you can remember seeing during that period?
Oh, David Bowie, first and foremost. I saw Bowie at Earl's Court, and my head exploded once again.
Yes.
Roxy Music at the Rainbow, which was a life-changing show, for sure. A huge influence on my life, for so many reasons.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, that those two just tick the box, don't they, at that point, really? I didn't, because there was also people like Bowie had been connected to Main Man, hadn't he? Tony DeFries, and then there was this bunch of people who were part of Tony Sonetta and all that bunch who were from that theatre company who were on is it the Coquettes or the
Yeah.
Warhol? Did you start getting interested in those things? Like, was it the Living Theatre and was it Bread and Puppet Theatre Company and those kind of those kind of groups and combos that seemed very avant-garde? Because Bowie was into things like that, and also Lindsay Kemp. So I didn't know if you were also kind of curious and interested in that kind of world of avant-garde art and dance and theatre and nudity. Let's face it, I think there was a lot of nudity during that period.
Well, I had read about Lindsay Kemp. I believe it was in Melody Maker. And I saw that Lindsay had a school in Oval. And I looked it up and I went there and I enrolled in a class because I figured, well, if it's good enough for David Bowie. So, of course, Lindsay wasn't my primary teacher. It was one of his disciples. But it was an extraordinary experience because I saw so much of David Bowie in the work that we did. They talked a lot about being aware of the shapes that you make with your body and in the negative space. And for all the years I saw David Bowie perform after that, I could always see how he would shape his hands and his head to create this kind of geometry that I saw Lindsay's school teach. I only actually met Lindsay at the school once on the last class I did. He came through and he would like kind of flutter by each of you and put a shoulder on you and tell you to bravely dance into your life and stuff like that. But it was extraordinary. He was kind of a genie. And later, he worked with Kate Bush, he worked with Peter Gabriel, and you could see his influence. It was very interesting. The Coquettes were in Northern California primarily, and I wasn't aware of them till later when I was Backstage Pass. And
Yes.
I got to know Tamara Duplanty, who was in the Screamers, and he had been involved with the Coquettes.
Right. God, that's so interesting. Yeah, I had to say that Lindsay Kemp story, I'd have dined out on that for the rest of my life, actually. I'd have probably exaggerated bits of it as well. But I mean, that's so cool to have been there and done that. I mean, that's just like a little window that you were there at the right time at the right place. I mean, God, that is so cool. Lindsay Kemp, oh, that's amazing. So were you in doing your studies? Is that like a 1-year kind of part of the course, and then you had to go back to America?
Most of these international programs were, because I didn't go as part of a specific college or university. I could have stayed on, but after a year of living in the cold, being a vegetarian, partying way too much, I became ill, and my parents insisted I come back to America.
Right.
I did, and I remember being on the flight home as the plane was taking off, looking down at England, feeling like this was a terrible mistake. I should be there, down there on the ground. I truly had a love affair with England.
Yes, God, my God. Did you ever discover the Cranks cafe or restaurant at that point when you were in London?
I did. It was one of the great spots for vegetarians at the time.
Yes,
Yeah.
amazing.
And kind of, Cranks was a little pricey and not that close to where I live, but I kind of existed on ski yogurt and vegetable samosas and gin and tonics for most of the years.
Yes, well, it's a healthy balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then you came back to America still on the study, were you, at that point, still having to finish your course or degree?
Yes. So I came back. Our two major universities in Los Angeles are UCLA and USC, the University of Southern California. And UCLA is a state-run school. And when I showed up with my transcripts from Richmond, they had no idea how to translate it into their system. However, when I went to USC, they were like, sure, English lit, we'll make it English lit here, this writing class, journalism 101. They cross-referenced it, and I wanted to be a journalist major. And I was well on my way. So I went to USC for my final 2 years.
Fantastic. When did you start playing an instrument? When did you start thinking, right, I'm going to start thinking about being in a band? Was this on the radar at that stage?
Only in a vague glimmer of my fantasy world. There were times, especially in England, when I would look at the lights on the performers and I would take in their body language and the sound they were making. And in my brain, I would go, I want to turn that light around on me. I want some of what they're doing. I don't know how to get across this river, but I would like to be there.
Yes.
And so I had this feeling that I wanted to do it. But other than some very rudimentary guitar and a few years of piano lessons as a kid, I wasn't really much of a musician. But it kind of, was like a good toothache in the back of my jaw. It kind of was there when I thought of it. And so when the opportunity came up, I jumped on the idea.
Yes.
I mean, we're moving ahead just a tiny bit, but yes, I had a fantasy of being in bands, but I didn't know if that would ever materialize.
Well, no, but then, but you're in LA in the sort of the mid 70s. It's pretty rock and roll, isn't it? Did you go to Rodney's English disco at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, I came back from England and it was like a prep course for being at Rodney's. And I had my Biba shiny eyeshadows and my rhinestones, and I loved Rodney's. It was so much fun. Just dancing with flashy, glammy, sexy kids and rock stars on their throne along one side. It was great.
Yes, and was it sort of the height of debauched rock and roll at this stage? Was Pamela Des Barres there and I don't know, Kim Fowley, and was it a scene which was both exciting and slightly sleazy at the same time?
Yeah, exciting and slightly sleazy are both good expressions of it. At that point, Pamela was definitely around Pamela and her and the GTO scene. However, at Rodney's, it was more like Sable Starr and Lori Maddox and Queenie, who were like the big groupies.
Right.
And they kind of owned the turf in many ways. I mean, I'm sure Pamela was there, but I don't know about you, but at that age, I was pretty self-absorbed. So I was more into my own story and being there than being all that observant. There were some things you couldn't miss. You couldn't miss Lori Maddox, who was truly a child being sexualized by every rock star that was there. It was, but you kind of gave into it because that's what the scene was. There was a lot of debauchery. The Continental Hyatt House was in full throttle. There were parties every night in hotel rooms. It was crazy. You know, I know Jenny probably talked to you a little bit about this, but I've often spoke about how sexually that was kind of the Gilded Age because it was before AIDS and, you know, birth control was free, usually at the free clinic, and STDs were not that prevalent. So sex became a very kind of social interchange, you know?
Yes.
Kind of like the Summer of Love, but with more rhinestones and sparkles and better music, actually.
Because I did an interview, there was a book came out recently. Oh, yes, Buzz Me In. That was about that studio, wasn't it, in LA? I think it was LA. He says, yes, the Inside Record Plant Studios. And I think this is the one which had there was 3 bedrooms with mirrors on the ceiling. There was jacuzzis. There was, you know, it was just, you know, a lot of cocaine on the mixing board. You know, there was the sort of the opening line of Hotel California about you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. And mirrors on the ceiling. So they think, you know, part of it was inspired. Well, it was recorded at that particular studio. So obviously there was a lot of, yes, fun. Hedonism was very much at the height at that period, wasn't it? And being in LA, you probably were at the very height of it.
I'm fascinated that there's a book about the record plant. I recorded there a lot and I partied there a lot and had actually a couple of not great experiences there with rock and roll kind of scenes that came down, but it was part of Hollywood. I've actually finished a memoir recently, and there's a whole chapter about that in there.
Yes, oh God. Yes, I got, yes. And then there was Laurel Canyon, wasn't there? There was your sensitive singer-songwriters getting deep down with Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, and there was Carole King's Tapestry. All these albums we all bought, and a bit of Van Morrison, though. I mean, obviously that wasn't LA, but you know, there was that scene, America, Horse with No Name. It was profound, but completely. What was it all about? We don't know, but it sounded amazing. I mean, did you also get into that sensitive singer-songwriter stuff as well, James Taylor?
Of course, more when I was a little younger. I loved Graham Nash's solo album, and you know, I grew up on, like in high school and stuff, like Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I always loved Joni Mitchell, especially the album Blue. To me, is one of those albums that I still play on my regular rotation. You know, it just is part of my soundtrack.
Yes.
I love still to hear the mamas and the papas harmonies. Can't not touch you.
Yes, well, absolutely. No, Blue's one of those albums I know that autumn's on the way because it suddenly appears. I start playing it a bit like at the beginning of summer, it's like the hissing of summer lawn, and then there's Blue. And sometimes Court and Spark and Blue were the first 2 albums, and then it was all the rest, even some of her later work, which I liked. But those works in the 70s were just incredible. Lyrically, God, they're beautiful. So then, as we were sort of partying through the 70s, how does the band, your first band, start to develop or form at this stage?
It was kind of miraculous, actually. When I look at all the components that had to align, I had about one semester left at USC, and I saw another sign on another wall, and this one said that Teen Magazine was looking for a copy editor. At the time, I was writing album reviews and reviewing bands for USC's newspaper, the Daily Trojan. And I got an interview at Teen, and I spoke with the editor, and she informed me that while they were looking for a copy editor, in truth, their entertainment editor had to take a leave of absence. And she wondered if I would consider stepping in and doing her job, doing interviews and filling that whole music and TV and film section of the magazine. It was a golden opportunity, and I just jumped at it.
Yes.
And so while I was at Teen, what we were talking about before, I had access to everything. I had passes to every show. I had open tabs at every club. I was traveling all over, going on tour with bands like Aerosmith and Van Halen and even the Osmonds. It was an extraordinary job for a young person like me.
Yes. Because was Danny Fields part of Teen Magazine at one stage in the 60s? It wasn't the one that broke the story about the Beatles being bigger than Christ, was it? I can't remember.
No.
I can't remember actually. Who was the editor of that magazine?
When I was there, Roxy Cameron.
Right. Yes. Sorry, that's a bit of a nerdy question there. Sorry.
No, but Teen Magazine, as opposed to just being a music magazine, it had a lot of like fashion and advice for teenage girls and how to put on mascara so your eyelashes look twice as long, all that sort of stuff. And then in the middle of it, there was this entertainment section that was almost like a pull-out. And so I was filling that with all kinds of stuff that was teen-centric, but also me-centric. Yeah, so I got to go hang out with the Bay City Rollers, which was like amazing, but then I would put Brian Eno in it.
My God.
And so it was kind of an extraordinary platform for me. And I knew everyone on the scene pretty much. And one night, Kim Fowley had invited me to see this band he was working with, the Runaways, playing the Whiskey. And he's like saying to me, they're perfect for Teen Magazine. So I agreed to show up. And I'm there, and I was just appalled. I'm looking at these young women in their corsets all laced in and jumping around like a wet dream for some pervy older guy. And it kind of, the whole cherry bump thing kind of turned my stomach. And they really grew into something great. I had nothing but admiration as time went on for Joan and for Lita and Sandy. And yeah, they really accomplished something and they were really good. But at the time, I was appalled. And I went back to the Rainbow, where most of my girlfriends were at a table, and I sat down and I was blabbing about how awful this band was and how much it pissed me off that these girls grew up and had no sense of what women's liberation was and feminism was. And I was kind of on my soapbox, and it just popped into my head. I said, we could start our own band, and we would never put up with that. We could do it, and we'll do it better. And I knew, I could see on their faces, they all assumed I was just joking, but I kept pushing the point. And I see Rodney walking by, and Rodney Bingenheimer comes over and he says, hey, what's happening? It's all happening, because that's how he always spoke back then. And I said, we start a new band. And I just pulled it out of my platform boot, I just said, it's called Backstage Pass. And Rodney's eyes just like got big, and he thought that was really cool. And he started writing about it in Phonograph Record Magazine in the next issue. Another journalist we knew, Justin Pierce and Harvey Kupernick, they picked it up, and it ended up in Sounds, and I believe in Melody Maker in England. But we hadn't rehearsed yet. We hadn't done anything yet. I'm not even sure we knew exactly who's in the group yet. But I realized we had to pull it together. And I was able to pull together Spock, Joanna, and Dean, who, by the way, was married to Rob Dean from Vivabeat.
Right, my God, it's interconnected. My God, so you had the nucleus of the band at that point.
Yeah, and Jenny was in on it. In between us, we started the group. And my postscript to that beginning was that Teen Magazine was not thrilled about me being in a punk band, and they felt that the image that I had was contrary to the squeaky clean vibe of Teen. And so the editor, Roxy, asked if I would change my name for being in the group. And so I went, I was Joanne Russo, that's my given name. And I was on my way to our first interview, which was with Slash Magazine. And we were on the Marina del Rey freeway, and I just said, Marina del Rey, I am Marina del Rey. And I went from Joanne to Marina in like a flash.
Blimey, that is decisive, isn't it? That is impulsive. That's what being young's all about, and that was it. You got your stage name. Did that feel quite comforting, having a bit of a different, I don't know, split personality that you could think, right, that's the real me, but this is going to be my stage me.
Absolutely. I felt like, I was Spy. By day, I was Joanne. By night, I was Marina. And coming from Greek heritage, having a name like Marina suddenly was really acceptable to that part of my family. And when I said I'm Marina del Rey, my mother said she would be Playa del Rey, which is another beach community in LA.
Excellent. That's so good. So you took keyboards at this stage and vocals.
Yes.
And then did you start sort of writing, rehearsing quite quickly at this point and thinking, God, we're going to have to put this together and get a gig? Because there was a lot of traction at that early stage.
There was, and we had a lot of support in the community. Cherokee Studios stepped up and offered us this amazing rehearsal room upstairs that had a one-way mirrored window. So we were kind of in a fishbowl, this group of girls and a rotating group of drummers who had come in. And we were all figuring out how to play and figure out songs and writing the songs. And it was kind of remarkable. I wish somebody took a video of it. I felt like we were like a good study of the time.
Yes.
But downstairs, Alice Cooper and David Bowie, along with Harry Maslin, the producer, were there. And, they would come up and spy on us and watch what we were doing.
That's fantastic, actually. Because there was a play I went to in London a few months ago called Stereophonic, which was this band. And it's very based on the Fleetwood Mac story. And they've sort of done their first album and it's not doing that terribly well. They're about to record the second one, but there's a single from the first album that's done really well. And suddenly there's a lot of interest and traction on the band. Yes, it's quite a nice little play. I don't know if you've come across it, but it's that kind of thing of it's set in the studio. So the mixing desk is got its back to the person the producer or engineer got his back to the audience, and there's this kind of glass front with the band rehearsing and playing and bickering. There's a lot of bickering at that stage. It's nice if you get a chance back in London, go and check out Stereophonic. Yes, but like I said, I think because the producer of Rumours, when he saw it, he'd written a book and then he saw the play and went, actually, that's quite similar to my story that I've written about. I think there was some sort of a little payment that he got for it, because I think it was a bit close to the Fleetwood Mac story, actually. So there you go. So yes, so the band. So you have released, he says, looking at your, yes, because you've got a Bandcamp page now, haven't you, with quite a lot of your material, Backstage Past 77. Is this kind of demos that you put together at this stage?
Well, actually, a few years ago, someone put out a cassette called Backstage Past 77, and I have a feeling, I didn't know we had a Bandcamp page. I'm going to assume it was the tracks off of that. We also had a track on Saturday Night Pogo, which was a Rhino Records anthology early on. And there have been a couple other projects that we popped up on, and recently my bandmate Jenny Shore's book came out, and she included a 45 with a couple of tracks.
Yes, well, I guess it's quite nice that you got a bit more traction. Actually, I just saw the name of your drummer on one of them, the Perv. That was a bit unfortunate. That was
Perv.
How did you get his name?
Oh, he's actually very sweet, but you gotta be a perv if you're in the band with like us girls, especially us girls at the time. We were some wild little girls.
Yes, there you go. That was it. And most of it was it. Did you record much of it in Cherry Keat Studios at this stage?
No, I recorded with Vivabeat at Cherokee, but Backstage Palace, I don't think we ever recorded there. We recorded other places.
Yes. Well, there you go. You've got this 9-track Bandcamp page at that point. So then the band, do you play much live in the area before you dissolve?
Yes, we played lots of shows in LA, really fun shows, and also San Francisco. We would go up and do the Mabuhay with Devo, with the Moms, with all kinds of bands, which was like a great place.
Oh my God.
In LA, we were doing a lot of shows around town. Probably the one that resonates the most for me was opening for Elvis Costello on his first time in LA at the Whiskey A Go Go. We had struck up a relationship with Jake Riviera, who started Stiff with Dave Robinson, and he came to LA both with Elvis Costello and with the Damned, and the Damned spent a lot of time with Backstage Pass. We put a couple of them up, and then the Screamers put a couple of them up. So our life was very intertwined with Jake, to the level that he got us to answer our own phone, Stiff Records. Seriously, like my mom would call and I go, Stiff, and Mom would go like, what, huh? And so
Right.
yes, Stiff in America kind of started Jenny and mine's apartment.
Yes. So but you never got a recording contract at this stage?
No, not really. Jake had told us he wanted to at least do a single with us, and that didn't materialize, so we didn't have an album deal. The thing is, we were short-lived, but what we did in that short period of time was pretty monumental, especially in regard to developing the Mask, which became like the preeminent punk club in LA, which is a story unto itself.
Not the Mask. God, I've never come across the Mask. So this is a punk club in LA.
You've never come across the Mask? You
Oh my
have to
God.
check it out. This is where every band started.
Right, the Mask. Oh my God. This is terrible, isn't it? I've just admitted that. I'll edit that bit out. No, I won't. I'll keep it in. Oh, God. So that was it. That was where it all happened with people like the Germsbags, Screamers, Dixies, X, the whole lot. And
So
Lance.
yeah, I'll share with you if you want to hear a little bit of the genesis and our involvement with it.
Yes. Tell us more.
Okay, so we were rehearsing at a small place, which was not great, and we were no longer at Cherokee. We needed to find a place, and I was at a restaurant on Santa Monica Boulevard, which is the main thoroughfare in LA, with Chaz Gray, who ended up in Walla Voodoo, but was in a band at the time called the Skulls, an early punk band, and Holly Vincent, who was in Backstage Pass with me. And we were lamenting the fact that we really needed space. And this very normal businesswoman looking person next to us leaned over and said, I couldn't help but hear you, but if you're looking for a space, there's this Scottish guy who rented this big basement just a couple blocks from here. You may want to check it out. It was like a little voice from the heavens. So we went over and we found Brendan Mullen in there. He had kind of created a little nest with a lot of avant-garde music in his books and a mattress on the floor. And I told him that we were looking for rehearsal space, and he had this giant, filthy place under it, like a porno theater in Hollywood, in the heart of Hollywood. And he was very, I don't know what I want to do with the space. And the more I got to know him, it really sounded like he was envisioning a place like Warhol's factory, like a place where all kinds of artists can come and work together and shoot videos and create art and play music. But cutting to the chase, we just said, look, if we clean up and we physically wall off a space, can we rehearse? And he agreed. And so Chaz and Holly and I and a few of the guys in Chaz's band physically framed a space, brought in a PA and started rehearsing. And shortly after that, the landlord for the building, approached Brendan, expressing concern that he really didn't have the financial stability to be renting that space. And because I worked at Teen Magazine and had a monthly salary, Brendan asked if I would co-sign the lease or they would lose the space, now called the Mask. And I asked my parents, and my parents told me that I could be liable for this whole lease. I should never do it. But I did it. I went, yeah, I'll do it. And I signed it. And so we moved in there. And shortly after, all these other bands started coming down. And one night, a couple people took the PA out of our rehearsal space and set it up like in a little stage area. And it was the first Mask show. And that's how the Mask began.
Right. It was the punk subculture central place. That was it. That was it. God, that was so it had a gothic S&M vibe to it as well, did you say?
No.
No, I just made that up, didn't I? Sorry about that. I couldn't. God, I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't remember what you said at the beginning. It had a what was the vibe of it? It was the punk central club then.
Yeah, but it was underneath a porno theater.
Ah, the porno. Yes, I thought there was something. I was gripped with your story. I was there. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Thinking, God, you're going to sign the contract. Don't sign the contract, but you did. That was so brave. And how long? And the club lasted only a few more years, didn't it?
Yeah, not long. Once they got booted, they tried to move to another space. It didn't really work out. But it was a great clubhouse where punks and new punks were coming from like the Valley and East LA and Hollywood. all the kids who kind of always felt like they were kind of a misfit, but they loved the music coming out of the punk bands in London and New York, found each other. And even though most of them didn't know how to play, just started bands. It was this spontaneous combustion of creativity that was just extraordinary for a while.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then sort of around that time, the late 70s, is that when Vivabeat starts?
Yeah. So what happened was Backstage Pass was going along just fine. I mean, we were changing members and stuff, but what first really drew me to this idea of playing music was that when I saw Roxy Music in London and I was watching what Brian Eno was doing, I knew I wanted to play synthesizers. I knew I wanted to explore this other level, for me, of art, of creating sound in just a different way at some point. Again, I didn't know how to get across to the other side of the river, but it materialized as one night Backstage Pass had played in San Francisco, and Jenny went off with a guy named Robert Garman, who's kind of this David Bowie-looking guy who's very cool. And coincidentally, he showed up in LA a week or two later, and he and a guitarist named Alec Murphy offered to come and record Backstage Pass, which they did. And then I became friends with Robert and Alec because they were super into this idea of experimental music and electronic music. So I started moving my keyboards to Alec's apartment, and even though I was still in Backstage Pass, I would just hang out with Alec and Robert playing for hours on end just with sound and, experimenting on just playing on nothingness and see what emerges, which was not Backstage Pass. Backstage Pass was very pop punk, let's write songs and play them kind of band. I loved it. And that was really the beginning of Vivabeat. So Vivabeat started doing some demos, mainly songs that Robert had written. And I met Peter Gabriel. And
yeah, so that's quite. How did Mr. Prog Rock at this point? I don't know if he got his. I don't think his solo career had started, had it? So how did you meet Peter Gabriel? Because I can't picture him in an LA punk club.
No,
I can confess, I'll say that out loud.
I don't know if Peter Gabriel's ever been in an LA punk club, but he is a surprising person, so you never know. But I was still a rock journalist. I was still working for Teen and Westwood One. And I had played the demo for a woman named Jane Eyre, real name, Jane Eyre, who worked at Atlantic Records, and she loved a song on the demo called Man from China. And she thought Peter might appreciate it as well. And Peter was coming into town for his, I think it was his first solo release project. And Jane was hosting a luncheon for him, and she choreographed it that I would be sat beside him. And we hit it off, both being vegetarians while everyone was ordering hamburgers and steaks, and we kind of ordered all the veggies on the menu. And then he said, why are you here? And I said, well, really, I'm here because I'm a journalist, but really, I play in this band and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, I would love to hear your band. And later that night, Peter came over to my apartment, blowing the minds of my roommates, mind you, walking in with Peter Gabriel. But and I played the music, and he took it in, and he said, it's really interesting, and there's something there, but you have to work on it more. You have to find what's in it, But he liked it, and he said, when you have your next stage demo. I would love to hear it. So based on that event, Alec, the guitar player, went into overdrive and contacted a musician he had played with in Boston, Marina Muhlfriedel, and who's a bass player and songwriter who played a bunch of Boston bands, and said, why don't you come out? We're putting this band together. Peter Gabriel is interested. And 3 people moved across America to form this band on the idea that Peter Gabriel kind of liked our music. But it worked out. I mean, they came out. We replaced Robert and got a lead singer named Terrence Robey, who was this blonde James Dean-looking actor, very openly gay, which was not really that popular at the time. But we got together and we did a really strong demo. And I went back to England. I used to go to England all the time. And I contacted Peter, and he told me that he was having a party that weekend. It was a full moon, and he would do these full moon croquet parties where people would go out by full moon and play croquet in his backyard in Bath and drink cups of peppermint tea from bone china cups. It was very, just marvelous. So my sister and I were there, and I called Rich Barbieri from Japan, the band Japan. I said, you want to go with us? And he agreed to drive and go with us out there. And it was just a magical Alice in Wonderland evening. And before we left, I just stuck the demo, the Vivabeat demo, in the fruit bowl on his dining room table. And I didn't say a word, right? And about a month, 6 weeks later, 4 or 5 in the morning, I get a call from Peter. And he's like, hello, blah, blah, blah. I want to introduce you to Tony Stratton Smith, who runs my record label, Charisma. And Strat gets on and very matter-of-factly says, everyone's whistling Man from China. I think it's time we take you under the Charisma wing. And he offered to sign us to a deal.
Wow, that is an amazing story. That is just boggling. I think he also had a book out, didn't he? Someone wrote a book about him as well, the Strat. I seem to remember doing an interview with somebody who did a book. Did you come across it?
No, but I'll look for that one too. How interesting. Strat was quite a character.
Yes, so it is... Yes, it came out 2021 by Chris Groom, called Strat, The Charismatic Life and Times of Tony Stratton Smith. Available from all good bookshops. Okay, there you go. Put it on your Christmas list. There you have it.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully you'll be mentioned in it. If you're not, then you could always return it. Anyway, my God, so that was it. You're in the studio. Oh, no, did you then have to go in the studio again to record it? Or was that the demo, or was that the finished piece?
That was a demo that included Man from China and several other songs. I think there were like 5 or 6 songs on the demo.
My God, you must have been so pleased.
Oh, it was incredible. It was this. As I always say, this does not happen. There were so many bands in LA who had been together a year, 2, 10, who had been trying to get deals, and here we are. I think we had played 2 or 3 gigs, and all of a sudden we had a record deal.
Yes.
Which was a plus and a minus. I think we would have benefited from a year on the road and writing another 20 songs before we start our first album. But it was such a gift of the fates. It was just an extraordinary experience. And then we had that first album, and that went quite well, but the record label Charisma was part of this great big Polygram merger, and we came out on Mercury Records in the US like the week the merger happened, and none of the albums did get in the stores till a week later. It was like every chaotic beat that could happen happened. And two of the people in the band had become heroin addicts, and we were just going through it. And nonetheless, we played shows, we went out there, we were writing more songs. And then before the second album, we were dropped from the label.
Right.
And we dropped the two people who had become heroin addicts from the band because they weren't functioning.
Which two were they? Was that Alec and Doug, or was it? I'm trying to work out who was in the band.
Oh, Alec and Connie. Alec became a heroin addict and dealer, and Connie was an extraordinary person. She was a Buick heiress. She's from this extraordinary family, and she was a prodigy synth player, just crazy, but very fragile and very neurotic, and she was really roped into the heroin thing, and it was not good.
Oh my God. And they both died quite soon after, don't they, of AIDS?
Yeah, and so did Terrence, died of AIDS a few years later. And Doug, in that, not long after that period, Doug was with us for a while longer, had a terrible motorcycle accident and became a paraplegic. And he died a couple of years ago, finally, from complications from that.
Yeah, my God. So... Right, so it's only you and Rob Dean left then from the band? No,
it was Mick Muhlfriedel and me and Terrence, and then we brought in a new drummer. We had a couple different drummers, but Chris Schindel was there the longest, and we had a few different guitarists, but Rob Dean and then Jeff Gilbert were the primary ones. But Rob Dean came and we did so much extraordinary work with Rob. I knew Rob because after teen, I worked at Areola Records, and Japan was on our label.
Right.
And I became very good friends with the band. And when things imploded with Alec Murphy, I called Rob. I knew he had parted ways with Japan. And I said, "You want to come live in LA and play in Vivabeat?" And he thought he would give it a go, and he did it for a few years before he was recruited by Gary Newman.
Yes, my God. So, yes. So how did you meet David Sylvian at this stage as well in Japan?
Yes, I met David.
Was he friendly, chatty, happy?
I wouldn't quite think of those terms.
No, probably not, was he? He was probably a bit moody.
He was moody, but sorry, that was probably mine.
That's all right.
David Sylvian was very self-absorbed, and I have to say at the same time, very self-conscious. He was beautiful, but very aware of being beautiful. And I always felt like he had to hold on to this certain invisible line as not to be judged. I thought he was talented. I liked Japan very much. I thought Mick Karn was extraordinary, and Rob, of course, was great, and they totally underused Rob. But David, I like David, but I couldn't get close to him. That door was not open, whereas the other players, Steve and Rich and Mick and Rob, were just lovely young guys, very, very dedicated musicians, all of them.
Yes, I bet David never did the washing up, did he? When he came to visit, I bet he just said, "No, I'm not doing that." or putting that in the trash. But then, so that's, yeah, so you worked with the production with Earl Mankey, whose brother, I think, was in a band called Concrete Blonde, wasn't he, at that stage?
Yeah, well, we didn't work with Earl on the first album. We worked with Jeffrey Lester on the first album, but really Earl Mankey, who our lawyer had first suggested we work with, was the perfect fit for Vivabeat. And we worked with him on a lot of our later recordings, and he was able to get the best out of us, and we loved his ideas. And Mick Muhlfriedel, who is still producing music, still occasionally works with Earl. And in fact, recently we've had 2 waves of remastered reissues, and Earl actually worked on one of those tracks for the reissue. But that is Earl's brother, and they were very involved. Earl was also very involved with the original band of Sparks and with the Beach Boys. And Earl Mankey is an LA treasure, really a complete classic, who has worked on so many amazing projects.
Yes, God, I could imagine. Actually, he's just must have such a CV. Actually, I don't. And what's happened to James, his brother, who was in Concrete Blonde? Is he still about? Because I haven't. They seem to have totally disappeared. Actually.
Yeah, I don't know where he is.
Fair enough. It's life, isn't it? Yeah. So at this stage, we're gone into the early '80s, haven't we? And things. Yes, it's tricky. Charisma Records has gone, hasn't it? And that's...
So Charisma was gone, but we were still recording, and we were... A lot was pivotal on this music video that we made. We made this, they did this song called The House is Burning, but There's No End Home. And that ended up in the movie Body Double, and I won an MTV award. It was kind of a big deal. And based on that, a manager named Gary Bacosta, who was actually the license holder at a radio station in LA, a very big one called K-Rock, wanted to work with us as a manager. And he got us another record deal and then ditched us with the money. And so we were recording at Cherokee, and the producer, who at that time was Joe Chigarelli, told us he hadn't been paid and the studio hadn't been paid, and we couldn't afford to buy our masters back, so we couldn't deliver an album to Polygram, who we had the record deal with. It was a mess, right?
Oh, that was horrible. That was not a good one, was it?
No, but just the same, we were getting the best shows of our lives. We're touring with Human League, we're playing with the Thompson Twins, we played the Palladium with the B-52s, with Gang of Four, with all these great bands, but we were kind of in a very difficult place.
Yes. So with those masters, did you ever get them back, or did you ever access them?
No.
So when
we had a lot of versions of songs, though, that we paid, that we paid for ourselves. But that's why when it all started coming around a few years ago to do repackaging and remasters and editions, we had archives of music, which is why we've had this resurgence so many years later. We found them at the bottom of a closet, and now the technology's there to be able to go in and to isolate the tracks, clean them up where needed. And that's why we had 2 on Rebellion remasters and 2 now on Live for Liberation Hall.
Fantastic. The House is Burning, which came out 2 years ago, the best of Vivabeat. So that was one that you financed and had it cleaned up, and then...
No.
You definitely didn't, did you?
No, what I said we financed was just actually tracks that we did. Rubelon licensed all that from us, and they put out those two packages. And then when that kind of faded out at the end of about a year and a half ago, another label, Liberation Hall, picked us up. And we're with them now. And now we have a best of with them. And a House is Burning expanded with them.
Brilliant. Ah, fantastic. So Liberation has saved the day. Yes. Did Rubella go bust or did he fold the label?
It's a very sad story. For years, Scott Davies had been putting out the absolute best 80s remastered reissues. He is a wizard, and he put all these fabulous projects, and he was having to negotiate, from what I understand, with Universal Music Group. And in the 11th hour of the label's existence, he was going to be releasing a Split Ends album that Universal Music Group had agreed to put out, and he had manufactured and packaged, and then whoops, no one told the band, and they pulled the plug, and he was out the money. And he said it was just physically taking a toll on him, the stress of dealing with these majors and licensing, and he decided to shutter the label after a really good run. I mean, I felt so bad for them.
Oh, that's a shame. It was a labor of love, wasn't it? He did so many good albums.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, life. God, rock and roll. It's not great, is it? Really, not good for your health and wealth. But never mind. So that was anyway. That's a vaguely, no, I don't know, happy sad bit or sad and happy bit. So you've got that out. So then, sort of 83, 84. The band finishes then at this point.
Yeah, around there, 83, 84. In 1984, I segued into working in the movie business, and that was like a big, sharp right turn for me. I started working for Danny DeVito and worked on a number of movies with him, and then for Showtime.
Fantastic. So how did you manage to navigate that sort of change of direction with Danny DeVito?
Well, Danny's wife, Rhea Perlman, was an actor on Cheers, and her sister, Heidi Perlman, was a writer on Cheers, and Marina Muhlfriedel knew Heidi from Boston. So when she moved out here, we got to know her, and we used to go to see Cheers tapings and hang out. And Danny was in Taxi at the time, and Heidi would invite us to go to her sister and Danny's house. Sometimes we'd swim in their pool, drink a bottle of their wine. And I became friends with Danny and Rhea through that. And when Vivabeat had its music out, Danny was really a fan. He really liked it. And he used to play it for his kids in the car on the way when he would drive them to school. And I heard Danny was going to be directing his first feature-length project. And I got in touch with him to ask him if he would hire me, that I wanted a change. I had done a couple music videos in Vivabeat, and I really loved the process, and I thought movies would be fun. I'd been to a lot of tapings. I liked the environment. And Danny's attitude was, you're going to be bored. You're used to playing and traveling. And I was the cliche, I'll do anything. And he hired me first as an assistant production secretary on a show called The Ratings Game, which was his first feature and a cable movie. And we had a great time. I spent over a year on that, and I thought I knew everything to know about movie making. And I went back and started working on music videos for friends' projects and getting hired on little projects. And about a couple of years later, Danny called me and said he was starting a movie called Throw Mama from the Train with Billy Crystal. And he invited me to come work on it. So I joined and became the associate producer on that one. So I went up through the ranks. I had been working on a lot of projects before then. And then I stayed on with him during Twins and then was producer on War of the Roses.
Wow, this is you're whizzing through it here, aren't you? So that was your late 80s. So then War of the Roses, 89. So then how do you navigate your 90s?
I worked on a lot of movies. I did like 10 Showtime movies, like typed in there. And I was very interested in writing. And I was interested in writing, I had been a journalist early on. I had enjoyed writing songs. Writing had always been my heart. I was a very emo poet when I was a kid. And I really wanted to delve into screenwriting, and I was hired by a big visual effects company at the time to head up an original programming division. And I would give me an opportunity to work with screenwriters and and write some of my own. And so I did that for like 5 or 6 years.
Yes, that was your 90s.
Actually, I was there until 2000.
Nice, up to the millennium. And then sort of after 2000, what was your next kind of episode and chapter?
Well, the overlap of that whole scenario was in 1980, I had married Mick. And so we had a parallel life together. He also worked in films, and then he ended up scoring a lot of stuff once we were out of Vivabeat. But we had 2 children along the way. But our first child sadly passed away before he was 3. And then we had a second son in 93 who is now very successful in the fashion world. And so I spent the 2000s writing a lot, exploring what was next. Hard to say exactly. I would be hired on projects. I still did some production stuff, but I was a mom.
Yes, well, I know. My God, that's it's a big thing actually. Yes, you kind of 24/7, isn't it? And also so much emotion. So, yes, God, that's incredible. And then sort of coming up then to the current day, what's your sort of projects you're working on, if you are, and have you got anything kind of in the pipeline that you're doing? Because you seem very active.
Yes, well, before the pandemic, a couple of years before the pandemic, I started performing in storytelling shows. I would go and read things I had written. I wrote a novel, and I would read chapters from that, a pretty surreal novel. I didn't yet get that in storytelling shows. People really told stories about themselves. That took me a while to catch on. So at first I was kind of the weird girl who I've read weird stories about strange people in South America. But eventually I caught on to the more memoir autobiographical work. And I won a storytelling show, a juried show. And the prize was I got my own show. And I was like, oh, geez, now I have to put a show together. And I thought, well, what do I know? And I figured I would do a rock and roll storytelling show. And I called it Our Lips Unsealed. And I started putting it together in Santa Monica, did a few shows, and it was really a success. People loved talking about rock and roll, like, about who you met, what your favorite song was, what song inspired you to break up with someone, who did you randomly end up next to on a plane, all of that. So we had some great stories, and then I started inviting friends of mine from the music industry to participate, musicians and photographers, publicists, you have it.
Yes.
And so I did that until the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, I started doing it again. And now it's become like a thing. I just did a show a short while ago. But I guess the big overlay to that through the 2000s to now is I wrote a novel and I wrote a memoir. And then the last 3-4 years, I've been very busy with the remasters and reissues. So and then I work oddly enough for the Tai Chi Foundation. I'm very into Tai Chi, and I'm a digital manager for them. I kind of run their communications.
Fantastic. My God, you have been very busy. Was that quite a relief getting the Vivabeat all remastered and packaged and out there?
Relief is an understatement. This is something I so hoped for in my life. Mick and I, for years, would sit down, have a glass of wine, and fantasize collectively about if only we could find the original masters, if only we could put this stuff out, and all the great songs we have they were on a small release on Permanent Press Records in the year 2000, but we really wanted them to have their due out in the world. And it was such a gift, and it was very strange. The Rubalon deal came together because a Vivabeat fan, this was before the war, but a fan who lives in Israel wrote me on Facebook and said, "Are you ever going to put out Party in the War Zone, as like a CD in the digital realm?" And he asked me if I knew about Rubalon. And I told him I had heard of Rubalon because Scott had written me for the lyrics and had once posted a video of ours. I didn't realize he had a label. And then this young man also contacted Rubalon and said, "Hey, do you know Vivabeat? You should really put them out, blah, blah, blah." And he kind of set us up. It was very sweet, and he was the trigger that got that going. And so, yes, it was an answer to my prayers, to tell you the truth, to be able to actually hold it, the small format and the large format, for the music to sound great. And I am so grateful to Liberation Hall now for keeping that going, for us to have a place where Vivabeat still lives.
Fantastic. God, that is good, isn't it? And it's nice because I think people are really, there's people who obviously know the band, but there's people who love, like I did when I was younger, or even now, discovering music you never heard before because it had been recorded before one's kind of time, like, going back into the 60s or 70s in my case. But it's nice. I guess young people start getting curious, and there's a lot more, like I said at the beginning, a lot more memoirs and exhibitions. Las Vegas has got the punk museum there now, and it just kind of adds to it, doesn't it? People are very curious, and there's that thing about CBGBs and Max's Kansas City that appears, and obviously now I have to sort of Yes, the Troubadour, the whiskey, and the mask that I can pretend I know about, which I can't. So
That's okay. No one will hold it against you. You're a long way from Hollywood Boulevard.
Well, yes. Well, that's amazing. So, so the memoir, is that something that you're going to be hoping to bring out sometime in the next year?
Yes. I only just now got word that I have a deal with a publisher, so I'm not going to say who it
No,
is.
no, don't jinx it.
The idea is for it to come out next fall 2026. Yeah, I'm very excited. It's like many memoirs. It's my first 30 years. I call it, my protracted youth, and it's really my life growing up in Hollywood as only a life in Hollywood could be, and then living in England with a lot of the crazy adventures I had there, coming back, and really going through the two bands. It's a lot of Backstage Pass, a lot of Vivabeat, both which had a lot of dramas, especially Vivabeat.
Yes, my God, absolutely. That was quite something. Have you managed to sort of locate lots of nice photographs or, I don't know, memorabilia to sort of include, illustrate the book with? Because people love, well, actually, I'll talk for myself. I love those pictures.
You know, I have a lot of stuff, but it's kind of in different boxes and online files. I have a feeling once this starts coming together with the publisher, that is going to be one of my main tasks for 2026. I just started a desktop folder for memoir photos, and I have some good stuff tucked away, and Jenny did such a good job on All Roads Lead to Punk in terms of sourcing photos and archival pieces.
Yes, no, that was very nicely illustrated. It was nicely designed, actually. Let's face it, that was a good one. So yes, well, I'll be very excited. Another book to get hold of. There you go. That's nice. So look, thank you ever so much for this. This has been there's been a lot to think about, actually. And on that last comment, I think we'll call it a day. But apart from the emotional goodbyes at the very end, a massive thank you to Marina Muhlfriedel for giving me the time for that interview. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. Also, all of these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. So have a great week. Stay safe.